let's get started. Then actually, I don't want to waste your time. And like, if you can introduce yourself, and then we can go take it from there.
I'm Dr. Seneff. I'm a senior research scientist at MIT. I have all of my training from MIT, bachelor's in biology, master's EE, and PhD degrees in electrical engineering and computer science. And I've worked at MIT all my life. I'm now at the highest rank of the research staff.
I read your article about relationship between COVID-19 and like, you know, so the chemical that you are focusing currently for last several years, which is glyphosate actually. And I had a couple of questions. So the first question from me is, like, human beings are all chemical factory. We are a chemical factory in general. And for that matter, most complex chemical factory, right? So
yes.
In that case, like, you know, we generate a lot of toxin ourselves. And then on top of it, like, you know, these are the toxins introduced from the external, like, you know, industrial toxins and all. So in that case, how do we distinguish, like, you know, which is good, like, you know, good chemical or bad chemical toxins? What are the ratings?
Oh, I think that everything that's synthetic is problematic. I think whenever you produce a synthetic molecule that's not natural in biology, you have to suspect that it might be very toxic, and you know, some much more than others, but you really have to be very, very careful, especially if you've developed a chemical that kills all plants, which is what glyphosate does. It kills all plants except that for those that have been engineered through insertion of genetic material from other species. Those are the only ones that are resistant to glyphosate. So it's a very toxic chemical to plants. And it's very naive to think that something that kills all plants is completely non-toxic to humans. It's not something that's believable. And yet we've been convinced that it's true with this chemical. Glyphosate in particular is supposed to be a wonderful herbicide because of its ability to control weeds without causing human toxicity. And that second part is simply a lie. I mean, it is very, very clear to me at this point that glyphosate is extremely toxic to humans. Possibly the most toxic chemical used in agriculture, in my opinion. And its mechanism of toxicity is insidious and cumulative. So for that reason, it doesn't happen right away. You don't immediately feel sick. It goes into your tissues and it messes up your proteins throughout your body and causes long-term disease. So you get things like diabetes, obesity, various cancers, gut problems, inflammatory gut, you get fatty liver disease, you get lung disease, and you get Alzheimer's and autism. I mean, there's just a huge list of diseases that are currently going up dramatically in our society, exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. So the correlations are absolutely stunning. And Nancy Swanson and others have published papers that show this. And yet people just say, well, correlation doesn't mean causation. They dismiss it. I mean, they really should pay attention to it, because you need to ask, if it's not glyphosate, what is it? And so far, I have not been able to come up with anything else. There's other things that are synergistically toxic with glyphosate. And it indeed causes many, many other chemicals to be more toxic than they would otherwise be, because it disrupts your body's ability to detoxify those things, for example, through the disruption of the liver cytochrome P450 enzymes. So it's really a very, very dangerous chemical, and it should have been never approved for marketing. And instead, it's pervasive across the globe. With the United States being a leader. I mean, we pretty much use more glyphosate per capita than any other country in the world. And we have that, to pay for that, we have all of our health issues, because there's just huge numbers of problems with diabetes and obesity and heart disease and all of these things in America as a consequence, I think, of chronic glyphosate poisoning.
Yeah, I see the clear connection, like, you know, the glyphosate has been used since 1974. Some of its form, like, you know, in the phosphate and nitrate form, has been used as fertilizer as well, right? So we have a strong data from 1974 available. So what is the confusion here? Like, you know, when a data can prove everything, we don't have to model anything else, right?
What's the question?
When we have tremendous data available from 1974 about this, we do not need to model anymore. Like, data itself can prove things for us.
Right. I mean, I think there's been tremendous evidence from the research literature that glyphosate is toxic, but for some reason, Monsanto always manages to convince the legislators, at least in America, that it's not a problem. And we don't even measure how much glyphosate's in our food. The government doesn't measure, it doesn't care. Canada has done a lot of measuring, and they found high levels in very popular foods, especially foods popular with children, like Cheerios and cookies, Oreo cookies and goldfish crackers. I mean, these are very popular foods with the children, and they're very highly contaminated with glyphosate. So the kids are being poisoned by it. And I think that's a primary factor in the autism epidemic.
Now, the next question is, like, we have a RNA, right, for the COVID-19 specifically, and that everything is inbuilt in the RNA structure, right? So how it creates additional proteins that can harm our innate immunity, and a lot other details it has already. So, I mean, what does the MIT community at this point of time, like especially the biocomputing community of MIT, say about this, especially this RNA that is a novel RNA, right? It's a novel
Right.
RNA.
Right. I mean, there's it looks like it is a unique virus. There's some controversy about whether it is in fact a virus, but I think it probably is a virus. And I think my belief is that it would not have been nearly so damaging to us if we weren't being poisoned by glyphosate. And the thing that I've realized recently is that I think we're getting a new exposure to glyphosate through the air as a consequence of the development of biofuels, biodiesel fuel and ethanol in the gasoline, and even biofuels used, aviation biofuel for the airplanes, and biodiesel used in the home heating oil. So all of these things there's been a technology being developed over the past decade or so, and it's been becoming increasingly commercialized, this idea of augmenting our fuel supply with fuels that are derived from plant material. And unfortunately, the plant material that are being used to produce these biofuels are heavily contaminated with glyphosate. And so the glyphosate is getting into the biofuels is what I think is happening. And then it's getting released into the air. And exactly when or where it's getting released, it could be on the barges while it's being shipped to the sites where it's processed. It could be released from the processing plants as they're producing, converting the biomass into biodiesel, or it could be at the gas station when the gas is put into the gas tank, or it could be coming out of the exhaust fumes of the vehicles that are driving the biofuel, or out of the home heating oil. I don't know. I mean, the research has not been done. It's all speculation at this point. But it makes a lot of sense, particularly in my opinion, because of the vaping story, because I was aware of the lung disease associated with vaping.
Horrible.
Before COVID-19 even hit.
Right.
I had been studying that because I had been suspecting that it might be due to glyphosate contamination in those vaping fumes from the e-cigarettes. And it's quite an amazing story, because that condition looks exactly like, the symptoms of it are exactly the same as the symptoms of a COVID-19 infection. And they have studied it. They've been puzzled as to exactly what it is in those fumes that is so toxic. But I do believe that the materials that are put into those cigarettes, the glycerol, for example, is coming from, and there's a propylene glycol that's derived from the glycerol, but there's an excess of glycerol being produced as a byproduct of the biodiesel manufacturing plants. They end up with glycerol left over. And I think that glycerol is making its way into the e-cigarettes, and that glycerol is contaminated with glyphosate. And so when you smoke the e-cigarette, you're breathing glyphosate into your lungs. It's poisoning your lung cells. And then it's doing something very, very interesting, I suspect, which is to get into the proteins in the lungs, and in particular, these proteins that are produced by the immune cells that are very, very powerful for trapping viruses and allowing the macrophages to clear them. So there's these proteins called lung surfactant proteins. Yeah. And so a study was done on mice. They exposed them to these fumes from the e-cigarettes for 3 months, and then they exposed them to the flu virus. So they were suspecting that it would cause them to react badly to the flu, and they confirmed that that was the case. They had a very the problem is that the innate immune system becomes wrecked by the glyphosate exposure. And then the adaptive immune system has to kick in because the viruses are proliferating and you can't control them. So you have to basically start shooting them because you can't trap them with those surfactants because those proteins are broken. So it's sort of, it's interesting science, but the lungs end up producing a lot of what's called cytotoxins and cytokines and chemokines, which are toxic, toxic molecules to help kill the viruses. And then because glyphosate also disrupts the ability to the antioxidant system, and that's been shown in multiple studies, things like glutathione are depleted by glyphosate. So you're unable to protect the lung cells from this. It's basically friendly fire. You're unable to protect the cells from the chemicals that they're releasing to try to kill the viruses. And so you end up destroying the lungs. Very, very interesting story. And it's just so fascinating to me that the vaping disease of the lungs exactly matches the COVID-19 infection, including sort of a dry cough, difficulty breathing, and specifically not a runny nose. And that's quite interesting that you don't get a runny nose with this disease or with either of these diseases. And then there can be some gut issues as well, some vomiting, gut discomfort. So it's exactly, and also a slight fever. I mean, all of that is exactly the same for these two diseases. So it's really interesting to me that I think the virus is causing those who are susceptible to react to it in such a way that they end up with a life-threatening disease. But if they had not been exposed to the glyphosate first, they might just have a cold or even, maybe a bad cold, but they wouldn't die from it.
Yeah, so like in my opinion, the concept of biofuel itself is not bad, right? I mean, it is a contaminant that is causing all these issues. So
right, exactly. It's sad because they were trying to do something good to try to reduce the consumption of petroleum, and they believed they were reducing carbon emissions. So they thought they were doing something good by producing these and there's been a lot of encouragement on the part of the government because everybody thinks this is a good thing to make this biodiesel fuel. Unfortunately, you can't do it from crops that are being exposed to toxic chemicals.
Yes. So in your research paper, in your article, actually, you have mentioned that there is a river mouth and water mouth and that carries runoff chemicals from pesticides and the herbicides, right? So this runoff and this geography has a lot of role to play in this case, I believe. On top of it, there is a timeline as well, right? So since this pesticide or the herbicide has been used since 1974, so is there a way we can stop usage of this, or but the biggest problem faced by the community is what is the alternate for the weed killer? What is the healthier alternate for desiccant in this case, right?
I mean, I think we need to abandon the whole concept of using chemicals to kill weeds and to kill insects and to kill fungus. I think we need to stop doing that. We need to go back to certified organic farming across the globe. I believe we have to just stop putting poisons on our food altogether. Glyphosate is a very bad chemical, but the other ones are not that much better. Some of them may even be worse. I don't know, but because glyphosate is so pervasive and because we consider it to be safe, we're using it much more than we are the other ones. And that is a huge problem. It's our perception, the difference between our perception of this chemical compared to what it actually can do. I think I think it would be really, really great if the governments could be motivated to work hard to help to support organic, regenerative agriculture, and to stop funding the chemical-based agriculture altogether, and to basically let them fail.
On that note, actually, there is a question of sustainability, actually, the quantity of production, the way this non-organic farming has been in picture for such a long time, proving to produce the yield, what you call yield per se in agriculture, right? So their biggest argument is that there is not enough yield with organic farming, and it may not be able to sustain a lot of people around the globe, considering the hunger problem around the globe.
That is the big argument that they use, feed the world. You can't feed the world without chemicals. I don't believe that. I think it does take more people. So it's going to take more people power. They'll have to hire more people to actually manage the weeds by hand. But that's totally doable. It's not like you can't do that. And the yield actually, initially when you first introduce the glyphosate, the yield goes up. The first 2 years, it looks really great. But then the glyphosate starts to actually mess up the soil so badly that the yield starts going down. And by the time you've done it for a few years, your crop starts to get sick too. It starts to get fungus infections. There's various diseases of the crops, and they're depleted in minerals, and they're not healthy because they are being affected by the glyphosate. Even the ones that have been engineered to resist it, that's only one protein that's been fixed. There's still many other proteins in those plants that are being badly affected by the glyphosate. So you really eventually end up ruining your soil and depleting and decreasing your yield. And of course, the cost of glyphosate has been going up too. So I think it's no longer cost effective. I think you could almost argue from an economic point of view that we should stop doing it. Because when you and of course also renewable agriculture actually puts carbon back into the soil, helps with the carbon problem of carbon emissions because of being more efficient at capturing the carbon and taking it out of the air.
Thank you. It is so ironic though that right now the whole thing, the way it is going on, some companies, some manufacturers are pushing for insecticides and disinfectants and lot more and more chemicals, taking advantage or of this fact that people are all scared right now, and they are like crazy, the way they piled up on disinfectants. So
I know it's so interesting how we have this whole notion that microbes are bad, antibiotics and antibacterials. I mean, we're just like obsessed with killing off the microbes, and actually the microbes are so essential for all life on Earth. They're our friends. We should really respect them, and we should honor them. We should try to help them to survive, not be trying to kill them off. I think it's a huge mistake.
Yeah, it is like kind of war between evil and good, I feel, at this point of time, because who is going to be the winner here? Majority of the population around the globe is scared about getting infected and so trying to kill kill the microbes, kill anything on your pathway, right? So if that frenzy is going on, and if this continues for several months now, then the introduction of chemicals in the soil and water body, it will be even more going forward. How to stop this craziness?
I know. I mean, we really have to stop it. We just have to, because we're going to be so sick, we won't even be able to reproduce at some point. And it is already affecting fertility. We can see fertility rates dropping in countries that are using a lot of these chemicals on their foods. I think it's really only, it hasn't been that long that we've been doing this, in less than 100 years, really, that we've been putting toxic chemicals on our crops. We should just really wake up and recognize that it is not a viable way to do agriculture in the long term. It's going to destroy the soil. It's going to destroy, it's going to cause the climate problems. It's contributing significantly, I think, to the climate problems. And then, of course, it's going to hurt all the species, including ourselves, in very major ways that we may not be able to recover from. I mean, it's just very...
Yeah, or in the worst case, we may evolve to be plastic consuming new creatures instead of human beings. I mean, that is one of the possibilities. Because now, because of the disinfection and all, use of plastic is getting promoted again, in public. Use of plastics in aeroplane parts is okay, but use of plastic in when 7.5 billion people are concerned, everyone is forced to use those kind of things, then we are going from bad to worse. Right?
I know plastics is another whole issue. That's a serious problem. We really we've created so many problems in the past 100 years. It's just going to be, future generations are going to look back on this era and they're not going to understand how we could have gone so far astray in so many ways. Hopefully we will eventually wake up and realize that we have to change our ways. And I'm picturing this really magical time when people become on board with the idea of, reducing the plastic use and reducing getting rid of the toxic chemicals on the foods, and just clean water, clean air. I mean, it's going to be so beautiful once we're back to that point. Not in my lifetime, of course, but hopefully I don't know, 100 years. It
Yeah.
could be.
Yeah, I know to some extent the pollution has been reduced because everyone is staying indoors, but it has other side effects. So now I think like I have taken enough lot of time from you now. Only 7 minutes left for the scheduled time. In fact, I was requesting 10 to 15 minutes, but looks like we have a lot more to discuss. But one question related to COVID-19 and like this herbicide that you are interested in, like fighting about. So like my question, I had one question actually. So this glyphosate, does it exacerbate the pulmonary, like reaction in the pulmonary tissues, like basically? And
Yes.
is it like the vulnerable get more what I mean is like people who are already inflated in their lungs using all this toxicity, accumulation of all the toxicity, do they have more vulnerability to, like this COVID? Actually, COVID-19, in my, like, I had to step back. It is not a virus. COVID-19 is a disease.
Yeah, you're
So,
right.
like it is like SAR, like SAR, a cow to see.
Yeah, SARS-CoV,
SARS-CoV, yeah.
coronavirus 2. SARS
So does
coronavirus
that
2
make
is the cause of.
vulnerable? Does it make people more vulnerable? Like this toxicity makes it makes people vulnerable. In other words.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The glyphosate, I think that the degree to which you respond badly to this virus is proportional to the degree to which you've been exposed to glyphosate, and especially if you've been exposed through the lungs by breathing it. That's why I think this biodiesel fuel is a problem, because it's producing, I believe it's causing glyphosate to be in the air, and people are breathing it. And so they're getting a direct hit on the lungs, and it's messing up the lungs' immune systems, messing up those immune cells by virtue of messing up those proteins that I mentioned, for example. Mm-hmm. Those proteins are very important for trapping the viruses, so that the macrophages can disappear them, can actually consume them. So when those proteins are broken, and those proteins have something called a collagen-like stalk that is exactly like collagen, with this pattern of every third amino acid being a glycine. Glyphosate is a glycine molecule, a complete glycine molecule, except that it has extra material stuck onto its nitrogen atom. So I think that the protein assembly machinery is getting confused and putting glyphosate in place of glycine. That's a known effect. There are a number of known non-coding amino acids that are analogs of coding amino acids that cause disease by virtue of confusing the machinery and putting themselves into the protein instead of the natural amino acid that should go there. I think that's what's happening with glyphosate. It's the only amino acid I know of, or the only molecule I know of, that can do that specifically for glycine. Glycine is the smallest amino acid, and it's very, very important in many proteins, but especially in collagen, or in collagen-like molecules like these collectins, which are so important for the immune system. But they're getting this glyphosate disrupting their ability to fold into the proper triple helix structure, so that they're not working properly, and they're probably bogging down the protein making machinery, because they have to be taken apart and reassembled because they're broken. And that makes the cell get really busy dealing with that, and it just doesn't have the capacity to fight the disease under those circumstances. The collagen, the surfactant, isn't working, and those proteins are also very important for breathing. They help to bring in the oxygen, and they help to clear viruses. Both of those things are defective when those proteins are defective. And there's another aspect that happens too. The lungs accumulate fat, and that's been shown with those mouse studies with the vaping. They had two obvious problems with their lungs. One was these proteins were not active, and two was the macrophages, the immune cells, were accumulating in the lungs, and they were piling on fats. They were storing tons of fatty acids inside those immune cells that were in the lungs. And that is exactly the same thing that happens in rats exposed to glyphosate at small doses. There was a study that was done where they exposed rats to glyphosate at doses below regulatory limits, and they found that it caused fatty liver disease. It caused fat accumulation in macrophages, in immune cells, in the liver. So it's exactly the same thing happening to the liver that's happening to the lungs, and glyphosate's causing that. And that's also related to its disruption of various proteins because of glycine substitution, I believe. So, this is, it seems like a really, really solid story to me. And it's still speculation because nothing's been tested. No one's done any research to prove it. But if I'm right, it's pretty amazing, you know.
So what I'm getting from all this discussion and reading, talking to you, like, is that our body has become a place to attract these monsters, like, yeah, Sarkov and Sarkov-2 and similar monsters, like, and they just find a simple ground in your body or your especially the pulmonary system to attach themselves and destroy.
I mean, the virus may actually be trying to do something helpful, but because the body's so sick, it doesn't succeed. I mean, it's quite interesting with viruses because they're kind of like little pellets of information. And that's another whole story, quite fascinating, but for another day. The body is so sick that it can't solve the problem. And so
that was
it
an
just kills
interesting
you.
point. The first time I'm hearing from you. First time I'm hearing like throughout this discussion that, like, it could be trying to do something good to you is something I wanted to hear, actually. Wishful thinking.
Yeah, but your body's just not able to handle it because it's so sick. It's just been so destroyed by the glyphosate that it's not able to respond correctly, and it just gives up the ghost, you know.
I think there is a lot of more like scope for further research, and some research might be like, try to be suppressed because of economic reasons and various things. I mean, the key is patience, like how patience, like now when people go so crazy about, like, downturn of economy, so it becomes really difficult to bring anything under control at this point of time. So let nature decide its course is what is the helplessness, like, being experienced by many right now.
Yeah.
My time is with you is up, actually. Like, I have like a lot more questions, so I will communicate with you in email, so whenever you have some time, like, you can answer. And I want to take this further. Actually, I have started a non-profit organization, actually, by name Mano Lahari. For me, like, chemistry, the physiology aspect and the psychology aspect are interconnected so well. So the fear factor that, like, shuts down your immunity. So that relationship I'm interested in, and I wanted to, like, work on spreading the, like, awareness on mental health, actually. But these are all correlated, so we're trying to connect the dots, and I'm contributing from my side what is possible from me. And if you can help me answering any questions and, help me with my venture, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. I will. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Have a good day, doctor.
You too. Stay safe.
You too.